Hi, I'm David.
And I'm Sarah. And last year we started our business by Design Homes, which includes design and construction, midterm rentals, and staging.
And on this podcast, we will be talking to other business owners about how they are creating unique and impactful businesses while building and managing their own lives and families.
Along the way, we'll share our journey as business owners and a busy family of 6.
We hope that you join us to learn and grow and discover new pathways to building life. Welcome to the David and Sarah podcast. Well, Jessica, welcome to the David and Sarah podcast. We are so grateful that you decided to join us today and have a conversation about your business and what you're building.
Thank you.
Why don't we get started with just tell us a little bit about your business, the name of it, what are you building, what is it, what are the services you provide, and then we'll kind of go from there.
Yeah, so my business is very new. Just in the past 2 months, I went live. The name of my company is Gemstone Design Studio. And my history has been with primarily commercial architecture. So that's kind of the core of my business. But over the years, I've done lots of other things on the design spectrum as a volunteer or for friends or just for fun. And so my hope as I build my business is that I will be able to offer a broad array of design services. So some of those things include logo design, graphic design, website design, home styling, even personal styling or event planning. Those are all things that I've done and had my hands in over the years. And so the goal is to kind of provide a one-stop shop for design with architecture as the core, but to really provide a service to people who maybe might see the whole creative process as intimidating or a little bit foreign, but to really be involved from start to finish. And the start could be a logo, the start could be a website, finish could be a grand opening event. So yeah.
Yeah, I love that. So what led you to that? Because that is a broad array of both digital and hard, if that's the right word, design services. So kind of what was the genesis? How did you end up with, yes, I need to go and start this business?
Yeah, it's an interesting path. It was kind of an unexpected decision for me. I have worked as an architect for over 20 years, and about 2 years ago, I joined a different company where I was doing a lot of business development and getting out in the public, and it was a company from another city that was wanting to start a local office. So I was helping kind of get that started. I was the first person. I was local. And there were just some major personal shifts for some of the head lead people in that company that shifted the direction. And so that ended a little bit suddenly. The need there was shifting, and it was a little bit unexpected. So several months ago, I came to a point where I didn't, they had to let me go, and I didn't have a job. And I really dug into, what do I want, or what do I think the next, 2 decades in my career should look like.
Right. That's a long time horizon, 2 decades.
Yeah, that's true. No, but I'm in my 40s. You guys are too, I think.
Yes, we are.
And that whole midlife crisis thing, there's a joke there, but there's also some reality underneath it. I mean, when you're in your 40s, you've worked for about 2 decades, and you've got about 2 decades left. And so, when this opportunity to really pause came up, I started digging into it. I started out, I had a few people ask me very early in that discovery process, hey, are you going to start your own business? And I was like, nah, it's not.
Never.
No, I was not one of those people who, I've had a lot of friends over the years as architects who've been like, my goal is to have my own firm eventually.
Right.
That's never been a goal for me. But as I just kind of explored, I realized, I loved being out of the office. I loved being connected with individuals. I loved touching a broader array of things than I had in the past that I was exposed to with this kind of business development position that I had last. partial position because it was kind of half traditional architecture, half business development. And so when I started looking around and thinking about it, I was talking to people in all kinds of tangential fields related to architecture. I was talking to people in sales related to architectural products, or marketing for architectural services, or nonprofits dealing with housing, or just all kinds of things that were related but not exactly architecture. So I was feeling a lot of draw to lots of different things, and really intrigued by and excited by the possibility of maybe getting to touch a lot of different stuff. That was an exciting possibility to me. At the same time, I was talking to some other local established firms and liked what I was hearing. And, you know, those firms were even talking about building a position for me to be able to do kind of a hybrid position, which was really appealing. But when I started really getting close to serious discussions with some of these firms, I had some great conversations with some really important people in my life. You know, spiritual leaders, peers, friends, family members, and a few key people when I would talk about things and all the things I was interested in. They were like, hey, maybe you should start your own business. That would really give you the opportunity to touch all the different kinds of things you want to, and to really discover some new territory. And so, you know, when important people in your life say things like that, it's time for some deeper consideration, some prayer, some more conversation, some more research. And so pretty soon after that, after I dug a little bit deeper into it, I felt really clearly that it was the path forward, even though it was a little bit scary, and still is, to be honest. You know, it's a very kind of undefined path. Like a traditional architecture firm, there's a clear path, or a traditional, you know, maybe even design, graphic design firm, or different things. But I realized that what I'm trying to do is not something I've seen really. I know how to do components of it. So it really is a discovery process, and I'm just excited to see how it unfolds. I think a big part of it for me also has been to realize, like, hey, failure is not an option, in the sense of, like, failure isn't really a thing. Like I might fail. I might get a year or two into this and realize it's not working out the way I thought it was, but that's not failure. That's an opportunity to redirect. And I've already in the past few months had such a great opportunity to learn so much, to meet different kinds of people that I maybe wouldn't have, to explore different ideas. And so that's an exciting season to be in.
Really exciting.
What I love about that is two things. And I think one is just the wisdom of, you know, you are going out on your own. You are going to have to bear the weight of the decision, but in the midst of that, you know, having a community around you and people to interact with, and leaders and peers to give you that sense of, like, this isn't just me. And it's not even just me and Jesus, right? It's there's a group of people who you can rely on, and that gives you the ability to have the endurance and the focus and to push through, you know, towards what is a really big decision. So I just think it's incredible that you use that kind of wisdom to navigate that. I think the other thing I'd like to pull a little further on is you said, hey, what you're trying to build is something that's different. It's not what you've seen, right? It's not just a commercial architecture firm. It is a design firm that encompasses, let's say, a lot of different practices. Can you maybe go a little deeper on the, you know, the heart, or the what it is behind the build out of that level of an organization, or that vision, if you will?
Yeah, I think for me, as I've kind of dug into this, you know, it started from this idea of I love all of these different aspects of design, and knowing that it all kind of generates from the same core of creativity and problem solving, and honestly, really that one-to-one interaction that I've always loved being an architect. I mean, one of my favorite aspects of the career has been to interact with clients, to understand what they need and what they want, and to help shape the best version of that for them. And so some of the technology per se of architecture applies to any kind of design project or element. Um, and then I also thought a lot about in terms of a kind of target audience. Some friends were, friends and people who were advising me were asking me like, so how would you describe your target audience, your ideal client? I started thinking a lot as a woman in architecture. I'm very much in the minority. And as I thought about all these other design related fields, they're mostly male dominated too. And I thought about women who might have an idea or a desire to start a business, and they need all these things like a logo, a website, a building, a space in a building, all that stuff, and thought about what if I could help simplify that for people. I've navigated this system for several years, 2 decades, and definitely feel like I can help kind of mediate as needed to help make it not so intimidating, to help navigate some things, and then also simplify it in terms of normally you would go to 8, 10, 12 different businesses or different designers over the course of a process if you started with a logo all the way to opening a business. And so simplifying that process too is really exciting to me, to really get to understand the vision for a business or something like that, and really help formulate a whole slate of visual and spatial identity just from start to finish is a really exciting process. So I realize that kind of is dependent on the right customers showing up. I haven't been able to do it yet. It's just been a few months, but that is my hope and desire, and I hope that people can trust, come to a place where they can trust me and I to really handle and steward that process from A to Z.
Yeah.
Well, it seems so important these days. Like I think consumers especially, and well, I guess even in the enterprise now, there is this expectation of a unified brand identity, a common, look and feel and texture of a given brand or a given company. So the idea of, but that's something that a lot of times it feels like to get there, you have to already be a company that's got resources and can spend money on all of these different people and these different skills and all of that. So the idea of you being able to go and interact with, other young entrepreneurs, especially women entrepreneurs, and go, hey, I can start to give you the feel of something that you wouldn't get until you're much further along now. I can start to give you that sense of here's how your brand, here's how it should feel for people when they interact with you, whether they're interacting with you online, via your website, via your email marketing, when you actually walk into the space, like each one of those should feel like a certain way. I think that there's something really, I think, impactful about being able to offer that kind of a thing to people who are early on in their journey.
Yeah, I'm really excited about that possibility. And I do think with my base, like core in architecture and space design, being able to think about things in that way, I think a lot of business owners might be familiar. I mean, everyone lives in a house. They go to buildings and places to do business. So everybody has some understanding of, I like the way this feels. I don't like the way that feels. And to be able to understand that at a core level of why and how, and then bring that back to logos and websites, and to kind of have that common thread, to not have, I'm sure we've all been to spaces where you're like, wait, this space and this logo, they just aren't, I don't know. And to really be able to bring that cohesion and that through line is something I'm excited about.
That is exciting.
And I love the core thing that you mentioned about, and you just touched on it too, but I know one of the things for us is that whether when people stay in one of our homes, or like I've been started staging and that type of thing, that we want to make sure that we're reflecting.
Dogs
Sorry.
happen. That happens.
Real life. Yes, I have two.
Dogs happen. That's okay.
What I was trying to say is, sorry, we shut our dog on the other room because he would be like right here trying to get in our laps.
It's like a weird magnet thing. If Sarah and I show up in our house in the same room, within 30 seconds or less, our dog Fritz will be in that
He will be
room
with us.
trying to be between us. He's like, it feels like I should be a part of this experience.
Yeah,
Except for
it makes sense.
Yeah, except for he's an 80-pound Labrador who doesn't just like,
Sure.
he's a presence. Anyway, what I was gonna say is backtrack. Oh, I love, because one of the things that we focus on inside of By Design Homes and inside of my recent staging prospects, and one of it is understanding design and space and the ability to help people, the people who are going to live and interact there, be able to do it in a way that makes sense, and it feels comfortable, and it feels right, if it can feel right. But I think one of the things I love too is that at the end it's back down to people, and from hearing like your heart behind what you're wanting to build is like you want to take, whether it's a woman entrepreneur who's trying to maybe she's a stay-at-home mom and she's trying to start a business or something, or it's a coming in and helping a company get off the ground and or maybe rebrand and change their outlook. I think at the end, and what I hear you saying too is the heart behind it is the people, is that you want them to be able to both that whatever is going to be outward, whether it's a logo or a design or a website, that or their space, that it feels like them and it looks like them and it portrays a sense of who they are, not Jessica and Gemstone design. It shows who they are and portraying that. And I think that's a vital piece of this kind of industry of design and interacting with people, is that you want people to feel like they're heard and seen inside of that.
Yeah, so true. And, in architecture in particular, some of the most famous architects are known for their style, and that's great. We need people like that. I love some of those buildings, but that's not what I'm trying to do. Like, my style can vary. One of my favorite projects I've done locally is a super modern concrete steel. Another one that I love locally is it's got a real 1920s soft velvet and fringe and pattern, and so it's like, and my personal house is like mid-century modern most of the house, and then I have one room that has all my family kind of heirloom stuff that's real 1930s and 40s, real feminine. So it's like personal style for me. Like, I have my home to do that in. I have, and I have goals for that. But I really want to be one that serves the client in the sense that you're talking about, really helping them discover how to convey what they want to convey through design, space, or graphics, or whatever it may be. So, yeah.
It came out so in our another podcast episode we did with Kristen Brown of Clarity Design Company. It's a thread that it came up again there, which is this is really about people, and it's about and it's two sides of it being about people. One, it is design is about creating an experience. It's about how that is going to impact the people that are interacting with you, with your brand, with your organization, with you as a person. But the other thing that I just hear from your heart is like Sarah was saying, that desire to impact, to be a service. That as you're interacting with people, this isn't just about Jessica putting her stamp on this thing, right? It's not like we went to Barcelona once and Gaudi is the architect there, and it's like normal building, Gaudi, normal building, Gaudi. Like it's really clear it was his stamp, right? It wasn't whoever it was that was going to be living there. And it's like, no, that's not the heart. There's an issue here that is wanting to be of service in terms of how we're, that, like so I was saying, that's been the core of our design from the homes for By Design Homes. And so we have a home in East Dallas. I think it's 1967, 1969, as far as when it was made.
Yeah.
It's straight mid-century modern. And so when Sarah was designing it, like that's the whole vibe. And people walk
Mhm.
into it and they're like it feels right.
Yeah.
Like they feel like they want to be in this space because it's designed to create, it's like a combination of what the home was intended to be, plus
Yeah.
our heart in terms of when we're building things for people who are in some kind of crisis is a place where life keeps moving, and it
Right.
has that. It creates peace
Mhm.
because of the way that it's been developed and the way that Sarah designed.
Yeah, for sure.
So, just let's go historical just a little bit, right? Like
Hmm.
I think we've gotten a really good sense of your heart and your drivers. So how did you end up here? How did you end up in architecture, a male driven, a male dominated, industry that allowed you to go on this 20-year journey to where you can, now stand in the place of confidence, knowing you can provide the services that you can.
Yeah. Um, so I will say I wasn't that intimidated by it being male dominated back when I started. And part of that is because of the way I grew up. I have a man's man for a dad and two brothers. And he was in the military. He's retired now. He was into cars and hunting and all that stuff. So I was always around that kind of stuff. In fact, like our family vacations, a lot of times were car related. Like, we went to the Corvette factory in Kentucky and
Love it.
we'd go to car shows
Right.
and stuff
Yeah.
like that. So I always was a little bit of a tomboy, just kind of out of necessity, the way I grew up. And then in high school, let's see, I was not one of those who decided when I was 7 that I was going to be an architect. It was definitely something I thought was a cool idea. Like I remember the first time I realized designing a building or space was a real job whenever I was watching, I can't remember, it might be Empire Strikes Back when they go meet Lando Calrissian in the Cloud City.
Right.
Anyway,
Yep.
Yeah.
and I was like, whoa. And at some point I was like, whoa, somebody got to design that and draw it and then build
Right.
it. And that was the first time it clicked. Like,
Oh, that's
oh,
amazing.
yeah. So that's one of my early memories of even thinking about it. But in high school, I was strong academically in like math and science, but I also was very creative. I was in like band and choir and drama, and I was having a hard time deciding kind of like which direction to go, and felt like I had to pick one or the other. And in high school, I had to write a paper about a career field where I was required to do an in-person interview, a phone interview, and some mail like questionnaires. And the things I was thinking about was like professional musician, professional writer, things like that. And I didn't know how to get in contact with people. And a teacher, the English teacher that I was writing the paper for, said, "Hey, you should think about architecture because, you can go to the phone book in the 90s and find architects."
Yeah.
So that's actually honestly where it started and solidified. It just really felt like for me a melding of like creative and practical, and it really is. I love that about architecture is it's a real touch and feel. It's a real practical thing that you're designing. You get to experience it and walk through it. And yeah, so that's kind of how I got into architecture from the beginning. And yeah, the first 15 years of my career, I worked for the same company, but it had probably 13 different names over that 15 years because of like mergers and acquisitions and selling and buying.
Yeah.
And a lot of that time frame, I was doing military and government projects. So it was kind of fun being a military kid in those environments because I would travel out of state to go work on a project on another military base out of state. And I would mention that my dad used to do this or whatever. And those military guys are like, "Okay, well, we're taking your picture with this and you're sending it to your dad." And,
Oh, it's a cool
they just
experience.
like, it really embraced me, which was really fun. And it was really interesting and unique. I got access to, I've been in some very top secret places, which is pretty cool. But then I was there for about 15 years. And then I joined one of the largest local in-state firms here in Arkansas. So I live in Arkansas. And worked there for about 6 years and really enjoyed working there. So I went from huge to like a large but local firm. And then the firm I joined 2 years ago was very small. I think eight people. And so I'm kind of done the opposite in terms of my career. A lot of people start small and then they get bigger and bigger. And I went big and got smaller and smaller. And now it's just me. And honestly, I'm kind of hoping to keep it that way. For the time being. I mean, in the same way that I said a few months ago, I would never start my own business.
Right.
Things could shift. But I'm really enjoying the idea of me being my personal hands-on being the core of the business and the opportunity to collaborate with lots of other independent business owners or designers in different ways, anyway, I was a little bit of a rabbit trail, but that's kind of my history of how I got to here.
I love it. I love hearing that. Because it also just like informs like your history and your understanding of design and architecture and how that can, build into what you want to do in the future.
Yeah.
So,
I will say another thing I thought about as I was thinking about embracing these other design aspects is, coming from this kind of like tomboy childhood and then architecture school in the 90s, it was very male dominated. You weren't a serious architect unless you wore all black and you were, sometimes you needed a deep voice. And in fact, I have my first boss. Sometimes I'd be like, hey, I need your deep voice on the phone. These guys aren't listening to me. That was a real thing.
Here's your script. But I need you to say these specific words to these people.
Kind of. Yeah.
Oh.
But most architects in my generation are men, and they're not that interested in interior design or graphics or, patterns and prints and anything that's maybe softer. And I understand that, but I also I don't want to be narrowed down by that. So those are things that I'm interested in and I really want to touch and be involved in. And so that was another aspect of Gemstone is I feel like I'm embracing some of the more feminine parts of myself that I haven't necessarily in the past in my career. So it's a fun thing.
That's very fun.
Mm-hmm.
So Jessica, is there a project that we could talk about that kind of that maybe is from your past, right? Do you think is we could dig into a little bit that where was kind of a piece of building you into who you are today? It could be a recent one, could be one far back, but I'd love to talk specifics about a project.
Yeah, I think a good one might be one of my favorite projects from when I was at this larger local firm. I think it would have been about 7 years ago. It's a movie theater. It's a one-off, independent, high-end movie theater in a small downtown area. And there are lots of ways that I think that shaped me. It was kind of a dream project for me. Honestly, it was my first project working at that firm. And I'm an avid movie watcher and I love going to the theater. And so to walk in and to this new job, I'm feeling a little nervous and they kind of hand me this project hey, we're doing this movie theater. I'm like, really? I've gotten to learn so much through that process about the things you don't see, the things you don't realize are there in a movie theater, all the technology. There's so many little pieces to the puzzle that most people don't realize in buildings in general. And with movies, there's aspects of sound and light. And this theater in particular, mind if I name drop, it's called Skylight Cinema in Bentonville, Arkansas.
Nice.
Yeah, they have a full kitchen and a full bar. And so then there's food service components and it's in this downtown. So it's addressing a small Arkansas downtown, but an active kind of a street life for the first time in this little town. And it was kind of pioneering in this area, a town that was growing really fast. And it kind of brought this new aspect to the downtown, which was really, really exciting. And I also established a great relationship with a client there that is an ongoing client for me now. He has followed me from one firm to another and then now on my own, and we're still talking about more work moving forward. And that kind of partnership has been really interesting and unique, and finding, understanding more about him as a person and how to he's a lawyer by background, and so learning more about how I need to share and explain things to him so that he could understand, because he comes from a very different background, and then how to understand more about what he needs and what his priorities are. And we developed this client relationship to where we've butted heads a few times, but for the better of our project and for our working relationship. And we still joke about some of the things that I stood up to him about, and he'll be like, I'm so glad you didn't let me do that, those kind of things. So yeah, that was a very key project for me.
I like that.
Sorry.
No, go ahead.
Was that a ground up project? Did you take over a building and renovate it, or what was that project scope?
Yeah, it was new construction, and interestingly, this owner was personal friends with a very high design, well-known architect in Texas that did some of the preliminary design. So when I came in, it wasn't that I was starting at zero, I was starting at 15-20%. So there was a basic layout, basic look and feel, and I ran with it from there, really made it into reality, got to do the fine tuning, and shifted some of the overall things, but to bring something into reality was really exciting. It's also because of my history with doing mostly military and government projects. I didn't have a lot of projects that I could tell my friends or family, like, hey, you should go see this. Yeah, because it was like federal buildings, military bases. Most people can't just, go see those things. So this was my first project that was very public. And like when my family comes to town or friends come to visit, I'll be like, hey, do you want to go see a movie? It's at the movie theater I designed. And I love it. It's really fun.
Yeah, I mean, we haven't actually built like a house or anything from the ground up. Maybe on the bucket list. But even just having the different construction and rehab projects that we've done, and even from a design standpoint, to be able to see it all on paper, but then to actually go walk into the room or to the space and see it, and you're like, oh, it came to life, it was a real thing, and it happened, and I can go stand inside of it now and see it be functional and work and have others enjoy it too. So that's a really cool feeling.
It is for sure. And I think also, if you're in design at all, sometimes it's hard to remember that other people's brains don't always work that way. Yeah. You know what I mean? It's like as designer, you can usually visualize something and you know what it's going to look like, and it's not a surprise. I mean, there's always surprises, but generally you kind of know because you've visualized it for a while. Yeah. But sometimes our clients or customers, they can't visualize it, and that's just how their brains work, and that's why we have the jobs we have. It's a privilege for sure.
Yes,
I love that. Yeah, it reminds me, the one that Sarah's talking about was one where when we got the house, it had been on the market for a while, and when we figured out why, and the reason was somebody else had done a rehab, and they had taken this big. It was probably an add-on that had been put in 30 years before. And I don't remember how big it was. I'm going to say 25 by 30. It's a really big room. And they had made it into this massive master bedroom with a fireplace. And it looked, it could have been amazing. There was only two problems to this design choice. One, the only door to the backyard was in the middle of this room. So
that room.
So if you got kids... Yeah, and you want them to play in the backyard, and you don't want them traipsing through your house, then that's not necessarily great.
Yeah, agreed.
The second issue was it's a 2,200 square foot home with 5 bedrooms and no dining room. So the only place to dine would be you could put 4 stools on an island in the kitchen.
3 stools.
3 stools on an island in the kitchen, and we kind of against a wall could kind of put a little bit of a seating area.
A little bistro table.
So you could make it happen, but not easily. So
not for as many people as would sleep in 5 bedrooms.
Yeah. Yeah. So we walked in and Sarah's like, well, look, but if we took the wall between the room and the closet, this big room, if we shifted it over a little bit, then we can still get this decent sized master bedroom with a great ensuite bath. And we can create an entire other living space and dining space out of the same square footage. Right. And so it was my first time to build a wall. So we ripped a wall down, built a new wall,
Moved a window.
Put a window in an external thing. We hadn't done that before, so there was, had to learn how to install Windows.
Yeah, nice.
And so all those kind of things, which were super fun for me. I like the construction process and the ordering of it and getting that together. Paid somebody else to come in and do the floating of the walls and painting, because I don't mind putting I'll put sheetrock on a wall. Just don't ask me to make it flat.
Yeah.
I need
It's
somebody
good
else.
that you know when to call someone else. That's an
I
important
know
skill
where
to
my
have.
boundaries are. I know what I can do. But like I said, but when we got done, like we could show you pictures. Like it's like, oh, this works. Like this now is a space that people walk into and they go, oh, they can live and exist. And we've had families stay there.
Yeah.
We've had multiple families who are in the middle of some kind of household crisis, and it's proven to be right, to be well done. And so the design has had the impact it was intended to have by changing the nature of that space.
Yeah.
Yeah. And, chances are whoever lived there and had that master suite before wasn't using that space fully anyway. They probably had way too much space to actually use well in that layout. So well done. I can picture it. I haven't been there, but I can picture it. And I'm confident it was the right decision.
Just another project that I think I'd heard you mention before was something around affordable housing and how you structure things. Does that sound familiar?
Yeah, that's something that is a relatively in the past year or two new interest for me, and I am starting to get involved in some things related to housing affordability. So I know nationwide we do have a housing shortage, especially anything that would be considered workforce or affordable level. So there's kind of there's varying definitions on what those things mean, but there's market rate would be one term that's used a lot. Market rate housing, that's kind of your upper middle class to upper class salary level.
What does that mean? What does that mean, market rate housing?
Yeah, it's kind of like, what's the going rate for real estate? And in a lot of markets, because the markets are so tight and there's a shortage, it's fairly high end. Market rate is generally fairly high end. It's not super extravagant, but it's going to be kind of, the people that would live there are usually kind of executive level, that kind of salary level. Then there's a common term right now, workforce housing. That is generally what you'd consider kind of middle class in most cases. There's some actual definitions that have to do with certain percentages of your area income average. And that's like 50 to 100% of that. So like for the Northwest Arkansas area here, I think it's somewhere around 100,000. That's the average. And so market rate housing is the top of that range up. Right. And then workforce housing is kind of 50 to 100% of that salary range. So honestly, most of my peers and friends fit within that kind of workforce housing. And then affordable housing is usually 50% of the average income and below. So that's kind of, there's varying definitions, and I may not have described them totally accurately, but that's a rough understanding of how that works. Yeah. So, I mean, I know around here, Northwest Arkansas has been described as the tightest mid-size city rental market in the U.S., like a 1% vacancy, which is basically a day or two turnover for a rental unit before it gets filled. I mean, it's super tight.
I was in Fayetteville a few months ago, and I saw some apartment buildings for sale, and I was thinking, I wish I could have known. I would have been right.
I wish I would have thought about it or had some cash flow 10 years ago or 20 years ago, at this point. So our region has pretty much doubled in the past 20 years and is in population, and is expected to double again in the next 15 years. So, part of that's driven by some really large corporations here. There's also a great culture of entrepreneurship here. There's also the whole, work from home and work-life balance, having access to outdoors and good schools and things like that. People can live someplace like Northwest Arkansas and maybe work for a big company that's not based here. So we just have this huge influx of people. There's a lot of cultural amenities too, cycling and arts and things like that. So there's a term that's kind of floated around a lot in housing and development and planning circles, missing middle housing. Little history lesson. For the past basically 50 years in the US, there's only been building, in terms of building housing, it's in individual homes on individual lots or huge apartment complexes with hundreds of units.
Right.
But in reality, and in the past before that, there's this whole middle range of housing typologies that we haven't really built much of. And ideally, that provides a great, kind of quality of life for people that people want.
And
And
are we
so a
talking,
lot of,
sorry, are we talking townhomes? Are we talking duplex, triplex,
yes,
quadplex? That kind
all
of,
of that, all of that. There's things like cottage court apartments. So that might
Right.
be, we have some around here that were built in the 30s and 40s. So it's like maybe 10 or 12 apartments that are arranged kind of in a U, and they have this like shared green space in the middle, duplexes and quads and things like that, especially that blend in with the neighborhood versus like a
Right.
cookie cutter kind of a thing.
right.
We've all seen unappealing duplexes with all you see is a garage door and a tiny front door, and
Yeah.
nobody really would choose that over
If
a
they had the
nice,
option.
yeah, true. So these are all kind of aspects of housing that are at play right now. We have almost no inventory. And so there's some local nonprofits that work in this realm. They're educating the public. They're trying to help guide planning processes and developers, educate developers about, helping guide people to making ethical decisions that are good for the long-term development of our region and our cities, and not just about a quick buck. So that's where something I'm about to get started with a small nonprofit. I just signed a contract to do some just on-demand work for them to help promote some of those things, and potentially even be able to bring a design kind of influence into some discussions to recognize, like we said, nobody really wants to live in those duplexes that are just garage door and front door and that's it. So how can we steer the conversation? And there's even, some of our larger cities around here would have paid staff that are planning professionals or have a design background, but we have smaller kind of peripheral cities that are growing super fast, but they're
Right.
small enough that they don't have paid professionals on their staff that can help make good decisions about
Right.
development,
Yeah.
about whether these things align with their long-term goals. And so that's one potential that I would be able to interact some at that level to help guide some processes there too. So yeah, that's a high, it's interesting because I really love this high level, like think big about our region, speak into kind of decision making that impacts the next 2 decades. But also, like, my first project as an independent designer was to go to someone's house and help direct her how to rearrange her furniture. It was it was a commercial client that I had done a project for in the past, and I ran into her and she was like, "Hey, can you come help me? I'm trying to figure out how to reuse my living spaces, and I've got work from home offices, and both my husband and I work from home." I spent the afternoon with her at her house and did that. Just really gave her some ideas and things like that. So yeah, it is. It sounds a little bit disconnected, but it's all the same to me. It really is about understanding how design affects each of us at the basic level, and in some ways at an ethical level. Housing affordability. If we don't address this issue, like honestly, the end result is more and more things like homelessness and people living in poverty. So if we can think at a higher level and provide more quality and more variety, then it does come down, could be the difference between someone being homeless or not as it trickles down the line. So anyway.
Yeah.
Such an interesting balance there, because I don't remember the exact stat, so I'm going to butcher it, but it's something like every 0.5% that the interest rate goes up, another 25 million people are priced out of the housing market.
Wow.
Those are not the right numbers, I'm sure
Sure.
of it, but
It is.
but
It affects.
the idea being
Yeah.
right that housing affordability, the bar with rates going up and yet home prices not going down,
Right.
because of the issue of rate lock-in, is creating this real dissonance, because it's a weird the regular residential market right now is super strange because the interest rates have gone way up, affordability therefore has gone down, but the prices aren't depressing, except for in some of the runaway markets, right? The Boise's, the Austins, right? Some of the markets that were just crazy, right? They've come down, but by and large, prices aren't depressing because there's not enough inventory.
Right.
Like the supply and demand, there's just not enough people leaving because if I've got my 2.8% interest rate on my house or whatever that is, if I leave this house, I can go buy a house half the size. Like
Right.
that's what I can go do. And so I'm not leaving.
And even if you can find one.
And if you can find one, because again, people aren't leaving. But I want to. The interesting thing there, though, on the issue of affordability is, like you said, the ethical piece. Because to get to affordable housing, you need this. It feels like you need this partnership between investors and developers and government,
Yeah.
because and they've got to be able to work together, and nonprofits, in a way that obviously people wouldn't be in the investment business if there wasn't some financial gain to be
Right.
made. But there is a way to make financial gain and do so still with the right values and sense of impact. I mean, when we've been shopping for houses, we've walked into some houses that were clearly flips, where it was they clearly flipped it with the how do I make a buck as fast as
Quick as I
possible,
can,
right? Like
yeah.
I could look at it and go, the craftsmanship is not where it should be. The design, this house is just gray. I think they just went, and if it was a floor or a cabinet or a paint color, they just went, give me gray and put it
Put
right.
it all
It's like
over.
Yeah.
I cannot. And or it's what I just had left over, and and so it's clear like the thoughtfulness wasn't there around how do I flip this house in a way that someone will want to live there because and it will
Yeah.
have all of the right aspects to it. And so
Yeah.
it feels like affordable housing is going to be a significant issue as we go forward, and I love the idea of you being able to and designers being able to get involved in that process, because
Right.
sometimes like the difference in terms of like hard costs between something that's designed well and something that's not doesn't have to be significant. You
Right.
don't
Yeah.
have to go put a $10,000 Viking stove in, to
Right.
make like you don't
Yeah.
like that's not required.
Right.
But if you just make some interesting decisions, some good design decisions around the outside aesthetics, around the inside aesthetics of these places, then you can still create homes that people want to live in and want to be a part
Yeah.
of. But you got to have the people with the right skills involved. Like that's something I'd love to circle back around. Let's, we
Yeah.
will schedule you for a follow up on the podcast.
That sounds great.
6 months or a year from now, to kind of
Yeah.
talk about this part of it. Like,
Yeah.
where have you been able to get involved and have an influence, and therefore, help partner with all those three stakeholders, so that way you end up
Yeah.
with yes, inexpensive homes, but they're inexpensive homes that don't represent an inherently lower quality of life because there was no
Right.
design
Yes.
taken into consideration.
Yeah, something that may not be evident to a lot of people is that we have zoning laws in our cities that have kind of forced us into some corners with the
Oh,
types of
that's why I
housing
think
that we
Texas
build.
has almost no duplexes, triplexes, and quadplexes. The zoning
Yeah.
is single family zoning, one house on this lot.
Yeah. So honestly, I know a lot of people who are involved in working with cities to try to get some of their zoning laws adjusted to allow for some of the things that we actually need and want in our cities in terms of that missing middle housing range. In some of our some of our cities where downtown has grown, we know nobody actually wants suburban sprawl. You choose that because it's affordable, it adds to your travel costs, all this stuff. But a way to counteract suburban sprawl is to densify in areas, your most dense areas and your secondary areas. And so honestly, until some of our zoning laws change, you can't really do that. But to be able to go into an existing neighborhood of very large homes that maybe they just have one or two people living in them, to allow someone to convert a large home into a duplex that's like a very well thought out design in a great walkable neighborhood. To be able to do that over and over again, to add what's called ADUs, accessory dwelling units. So like mother-in-law cottage, or in some
Right.
larger cities in the Northeast, basement apartments, attic apartments. Those things are very common in some locations, but not in Arkansas, and probably not in Texas either.
Not in Texas.
And I
So
think
in
Texas
this,
kind of has this philosophy of we've got all the land we need, therefore,
Mhm.
we don't need to do that.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, there's so many things that we don't realize are repercussions of that. Suburban development actually costs our city governments money, versus dense urban development actually makes our cities
Mm.
a profit, because you have your utilities and things are closer together. A lot of times, the city governments are expanding utilities out to these spread out areas, and it does nothing but cost our cities. And our cities need money to be able to do the kind of work they need to do. Things related to safety, providing parks and trails and things like that. I'd rather my city be able to spend more
Yeah.
money on things that serve everyone versus losing money in these kind of suburban developments. So I understand, there's a place for all kinds of development, but we know most people wouldn't prefer that. You'd rather, one or the other. You'd rather live in the country or live in the city, and let's allow for both.
Yeah. Well, and to your point of like taking a larger house, like and making it like a duplex or fourplex or something,
Yeah.
like when I first moved to Houston from Illinois, we lived in a duplex, but it was inside a neighborhood. And so like there were single family houses, but then there was like, 5 or 6 streets of duplexes. And so it was nice
Yeah.
because, we had the feeling of a neighborhood, and we had neighbors and we had interactions and we
Mm-hmm.
had a community pool that we could walk to and go swim, and just so we had that balance of being in a home, but it wasn't the whole structure. It was half of it.
Yeah.
And that we were on a whole, street just like ours. And so, but with inside this wider neighborhood. And so it's just really
Mm-hmm.
nice to have kind of both, because we have some areas like that here, some near our downtown area at McKinney, and then others that we've seen newer developments of these smaller kind of, you know,
Almost like garden homes, but maybe not quite.
Yeah.
yeah, townhome type things where you
Mm-hmm.
have your little yard space. But there's a couple in particular that actually they've done well in the design where you're like, oh, well, I would want to live there. It's got this nice
Yeah.
interaction and it's aesthetically pleasing on the outside, and so I like the I don't know, just that sense of you can have something that's smaller and more affordable, and or it maybe even more like a starter home, because I know we have several people
Yeah.
that we know that can't even afford to get a starter home right now. They're
Yeah.
they're having to rent
Honestly.
or whatever just to have somewhere to live, where they'd
Yeah.
they'd love to have a home and they can't, and so
Mm-hmm.
um
I couldn't
yeah.
I couldn't buy a house now. I bought a house 18 years ago, and it's almost tripled in value. I have done work to it, but it's a small house, and yeah, there's no way, even at the salary level I was making before I started my own business, there's no way I could have gotten into a house.
Right.
Um
Yeah.
yeah. I also was just lost my train of thought. I can't remember what I was going to say. Sorry.
But I think your point about diversity does matter. I'm not sure I agree that nobody wants to live in a suburban environment.
Good point.
I'm not,
Good point. Good
I'm
point.
not
I shouldn't.
sure
As we sit in our
Like-
suburban house.
because I feel like families with small kids
Sure.
want a yard, would ideally have a yard where their kids can play in
Yeah.
and be
Yes.
really close to a grocery store. Like now I want to live in the country. Growing
Yeah.
up, I did not want to live in the country because I was not willing to forego the convenience
Yes.
of all the things being very close.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Now today, it is true. Like my kids, when we drive a little bit further north, they're like, "Dad, why can we not have
Yeah.
that farm that has all of the rolling hills and the like that's where my
Yeah.
kids would love to do." And I was
Sure.
like, well,
I
we're
did
gonna have to get a
remember.
little bit better at this business thing before we can make,
Right.
that thing happen.
Yeah. No, I did remember what I was thinking earlier. It was about how, there are stages of life that different housing types make sense.
Right.
And sometimes I think we can get stuck in this mode of like, I want to build my parents are a good example. My parents built a 4-bedroom house with 3 children in the family. We're all grown adults. Both my brothers have families, children and spouses, and they honestly, at some point, as they're aging, they don't want to take care of that house anymore.
Of course.
Right.
And even thinking about, different people early in your marriage, maybe before you have kids, a small house or an apartment was a great fit. And as you have kids and there's just a sense of like our whole culture has become a little bit more transitory and flexible.
For sure.
And so I
Yes.
think that we're going to see that reflected in housing. And it allows us to really think about, the American dream has always been, well, not always. I think probably since the 90s has been as big a house as possible.
Right.
And a room for everybody. But then the practicality of it sometimes is once all the kids grow up and move out of the house, and you maybe just don't need it. And maybe it just becomes an empty room that you just have to clean and try not to fill up with clutter,
Yeah.
So maybe it makes sense to be a little more transitory. Different housing typologies serve different types of people and people in different stages of life or situations of life. And so that's something also that I'm hoping to help with educating other people is like recognizing, hey, my parents love their 18 acres outside of town and I want them to have what they want. But don't forget, there's lots of people who could never afford to live there. There's lots of people who would prefer to live in a denser downtown. And so I hope that we're not making decisions based on just what I want, but on what's best for our whole community when we start thinking about different types of housing. So.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's like there has to be a more broad view of how do we serve across the board. And it's going to require concessions, right? I mean, I was listening to somebody else talk about, I think they were talking about in some California neighborhoods where there clearly is plenty of room for ADUs in a lot of different locations, but it's an 18-month permitting process. Like if you want to ask the government to do that, man, it is, and that's because the government is serving the people, and the people of that neighborhood a lot of times would rather not have additional people in the neighborhood, right?
Yeah.
And so you kind of have this, like there's some points of conflict in terms of if I'm only out for serving my own needs and what I need, I'm going to have one view. But if I have an awareness of there is an affordability crisis that is only going to increase as time goes on, then that means that I may have to make some concessions. And who leads that drive from a concession standpoint is an interesting question. So we'll see. I haven't done any research. I don't know to what degree things like opportunity zones actually, incentivized investors to be able to come in and help with some of these issues. I know in Dallas there was quite a bit of that, and if you're willing to jump through the hoops, because it's government, so there's hoops, and there was the opportunity to do some really positive things, to be able to impact it. So it gets back to that. There's got to be a level of ethical partnership between the right stakeholders, because
for sure,
the people who need the affordable housing are not going to be the ones who can influence the change.
True. Very true. But, in the discussion of missing middle housing, the kind of poster children are firefighters and school teachers. I mean, like we all want our school teachers to be able to live close to their school that they teach in. And we all want our firefighters to be able to live close to the fire station that they work at. And that salary level fits clearly within that workforce housing level. And if people who work those kind of jobs can't afford to live in your city and have to live an hour away and drive, there's a problem. And there's a benefit to you, even if you are a very wealthy homeowner who would prefer not to have ADUs in your neighborhood, that will affect you someday. Like whether it's your school has a hard time hiring teachers, or your fire department or police department can't find people to hire. Like that's a real problem. So
that is very well put, and a great example of, we live in community, whether we like it or not. We live in community, and we impact it, and so this is good. Well, this is quite a a rabbit trail around affordable housing, but I think a fascinating topic. And very much still connected to the overall concept of design and how important that is in terms of how people experience things. So well, Jessica, I think we're probably getting close to the end. Maybe just as a final, like when, if someone's gotten to this place in the podcast, they've hung out with us for 58 minutes and, and they're a potential client of yours, like, what would you want to say to, like, who is your target client, or what would you want to say to somebody who's watching to go, hey, this is why you should work with me?
Yeah,
I
I
know I'm
think,
asking you to promote yourself. I'm just,
yeah, yeah.
Shameless
I
self-plug.
appreciate the opportunity. It's just sometimes hard to talk about yourself a little bit, but yeah, I think the big thing is like, I hope that if you've been listening, like my desire to actually help people kind of express what they want to express, to convey who they are in design comes across, because that really is what I would like to do. And that could be any of those facets of design. And yeah, I think that would be the why. And yeah, like I kind of described earlier, I think an ideal client might be from a logo to a building to a grand opening, but I'm also just feel really open to explore what this new phase of my life and what the shape of Gemstone will become. Like, I'm just very excited to explore that, and really open to collaboration and all of that stuff. And yeah, just have a lot of hope that no matter what, the process is going to be great and the end product will be good too. So
Yeah, and I think that point, one of the things that's ringing for me is that point about collaboration,
Yeah.
right? That
mm-hmm.
I can see with the diversity of things that you bring to the table, that they're just being real opportunities for you to help somebody else, maybe somebody who is just in construction, somebody who is doing some other piece of the business, to go, hey, if I had Gemstone as a partner with me in this, then I could elevate what I'm doing to another level and deliver
Yeah.
a significantly greater amount of value. And so for people who are watching, think about Gemstone when you think about your projects and what you're
Yeah.
doing.
Thank
And
you.
I have a quick question. So
Mhm.
Gemstone, how did you come up with the name? Was there anything behind it, or?
Yeah, when I would try to describe to people in this discovery process of what do I want to do, I would talk about all the facets of design, and I would talk about multifaceted design. And so I kind of started, brainstorming along that idea. I actually started looking up, the Latin word for anyway, what is it? Polyhedron is the word for a multifaceted shape. And I was like, oh, that's a really cool, but it sounds like an allergy medicine. So, so I was thinking about things like that. And when I came up to the word gemstone, I was like, oh, that's interesting. And I felt like it merged that idea of multifaceted, but it also had a little hint of something that's kind of feminine. Like, honestly,
Yeah.
you don't, and yeah, as I described earlier, that's an aspect of this new process for me, is I'm really trying to embrace more of that feminine aspect of design. And so I just felt like it captured something unique. I did Google searches, hadn't found any other gemstone design studios that were architecture and focused. There's definitely
Right.
gemstone design studios that
Right.
design gems, but that's
Yes.
not me.
Yeah. No, I love that. I just realized we've been saying the name, and I was like, oh, I wonder if there was something behind it. So I
Yeah.
love that. And it
Thanks.
does create an image in your mind of something that is like structurally has lots of different facets and can reflect light differently, but then is still something very beautiful and to look at. So, I love that.
Yeah.
Well, Jessica, if people want to reach out to you, well, how should they get a hold of you? Social or website? How should they get a hold of you?
Yeah, I'm all over the place. My website is gemstonedesignstudio.com, and you'll find links to all my social media there. You can also probably search me on any of the social media except TikTok. I feel too
No
old
dancing?
for TikTok, but no.
No dancing?
We aren't
Yeah,
on
so
TikTok either. So
yeah, yeah. I'll stick with Instagram and get the stuff that was really good from TikTok bleeding over a week later.
yeah.
Makes sense. And we'll
Yeah.
make sure those links are in wherever you're listening to this, whether it's on YouTube or Spotify. We'll make sure that links are available to Gemstone Design Studios. Jessica, this was an amazing conversation. Thank you so much
Thank
for spending the time with us and kind of giving us your vision and your heart and giving us a clear picture of the way Gemstone can have an impact. So thank you.
Thank you so much. I really enjoyed this conversation, and I really appreciate you guys and your vision for your podcast and your business. And yeah, really grateful for the chance to talk to you guys.